Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presented by Quimbee Bar Review. During today's informational session, we'll be talking all about the MPT. We'll be breaking down the Multistate Performance Test, covering the tested subject areas, explaining how the MPT is scored, and highlighting how you can best demonstrate your practical legal skills to ace the performance task portion of the bar exam in your jurisdiction. We're going to get started here in just a moment to allow time for everybody to join us. Once we get started, our presentation is going to begin with a breakdown of the MPT from Lori Eller, who is a bar review director here at Quimbee. And then at the end, we'll have time to answer your questions live. You can definitely submit them as you have them in the Q&A feature below, and either one of our Quimbee team members who are working in the background here will answer you directly, or we'll address it during that live Q&A at the end. We might not be able to get to everyone, so if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to provide you with our contact information at the end of the webinar, or you can always find it by clicking around quimbee.com. All right, with that, I'm going to send things over to Lori, who's going to get our presentation started today. Take it away, Lori.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for attending today. Let's go ahead and get started. So like Emily said, my name is Lori, and I am a bar review director here at Quimbee. So I've taken and passed the bar exam in Massachusetts, and now I help students along their bar prep journey. So for today's agenda, after a brief intro about Quimbee, we're going to start off by talking about what the bar exam looks like. That's because today's presentation will mostly focus on a portion of the bar exam called the Multistate Performance Test, or the MPT. As Emily mentioned, we'll cover writing strategy, formatting, and we'll look through parts of a sample MPT question from a past bar exam together. Then we'll chat about how to prepare, including common mistakes that students can avoid. And then, as Emily mentioned, at the end of the presentation, we'll have some time for some live Q&A. So first, what is Quimbee? So we are an all-in-one platform for lifelong legal learning. So we will help support you from your very first day of law school until your final day of practice. We are here to help you succeed. So we have 4 different products. So again, kind of starting out, you'll have those study aids to help prepare you for class and law school exams. Next, we'll help you take the MPRE with our free MPRE review. Then prepare for the bar exam with our bar review. And then finally, after you are a licensed attorney, we have a CLE or continuing legal education subscription that you can use to get the credits that you need to keep your license active. So what is the bar exam? We're going to put a poll up to see how many of you are taking the uniform bar exam or the UBE versus Florida, California, or some other state. If you're planning on practicing law in a state that is colored orange on this map, that means you're taking the UBE. The UBE is a uniform bar exam that's administered across about 41 different jurisdictions across the United States. So there's no state-specific law for it. It's just federal law, common law principles, and some kind of model things like model penal code, for an example. So same exam across those different states, and it is comprised of 3 different parts. The multi-state bar exam, the MBE, the multi-state essay exam, the MEE, and of course, what we'll be talking about today, the multi-state performance test. And here you can see the weightings with the MBE being 50%, the MEE 30%, and then today's topic is 20% of your score. And just quickly about those other 2 portions, since we'll be focusing a lot on the MPT today, the MBE is the multiple choice component. So it's 200 multiple choice questions covering your typical like 1L subjects plus evidence. And then the essays are mostly similar to a law school essay exam, 30 minutes each, and it covers all of those MBE topics as well as some additional like 2L, 3L subjects. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this poll out here. Looks like we've gotten a good amount of you that filled that out. Looks like the majority of you are taking the UBE. We got about 63%. And then we have a good chunk of California students. So hello to all of those that might be joining from the West Coast. So California does have a PT. We'll talk about that in just a second. So you're still going to be learning a lot from this presentation today. Okay. Now let's get into the performance test a little bit more. So as you saw on that previous slide, more than 40 different jurisdictions are administering that uniform bar exam, which means they also use the MPT. The MPT is administered in every jurisdiction that has adopted the UBE, plus many non-UBE jurisdictions also use the MPT. So in total, about 50 jurisdictions use the MPT. So just about almost all US bar exams are containing some type of that performance test component, because states can license each component individually. Just about all states use the MPT except California and Nevada. They create their own performance tests. So that's why I mentioned California students. This information will still be helpful to you because very similar format. It's just that California drops their own. And then 4 jurisdictions don't use any type of performance test component. Florida is a big one, as well as Louisiana, Virginia, and then Puerto Rico. Those do not have any type of performance test. And then for those of you taking the bar exam a couple years from now, if you're keeping an eye on the next gen bar exam, there also is a performance test component in that exam. Unlike the current one, or excuse me, much like the current one, it will provide examinees with the drafting assignment and then all the facts and law you need for that assignment. So it's going to test kind of your legal writing skills essentially. Now, first, let's talk a little bit about why the MPT is administered. So the purpose of the MPT is to test these following skills. Things like problem solving, legal analysis and reasoning, factual analysis, communication, something big when you're practicing as an attorney, organization and management of a legal task, and recognizing and resolving ethical dilemmas. So essentially, the MPT is designed to assess whether an examinee can apply real-world lawyering skills to an assignment that a new lawyer would likely be tasked with. And it is the most skills-based portion of the UBE. Now, let's get into a little bit more detail. So you have 2 90-minute questions in 1 3-hour block. So you're not strictly, limited to 90 minutes each, but you get 2 for a 3-hour session. The materials that they give you is essentially like a simulated case file. So you'll have a file and a library. And the specific assignment that the examinee is to complete is described in a memorandum from a supervising attorney. Then that file is going to contain, again, that task memorandum. So it outlines what specific thing you're supposed to draft. And it also contains source documents. So these are going to contain the facts of some fictitious case that you as a new attorney are working. Some examples of the legal documents that this might encompass are transcripts of client interviews, maybe depositions, certain pleadings, correspondence, maybe from your client, or just other things like client documents, lawyer's notes, medical records. It's quite a big swath of just factual evidence that you would have as you're working on a case as an attorney. Now, the library, that's going to contain all of your law. So it's going to contain statutes, cases, and other forms of rules for a fictional jurisdiction. The MPT case file that you get, it's going to contain both relevant and irrelevant information. So it's up to you to figure out what you'll need to complete your task. And you'll also be expected to recognize when facts are inconsistent or missing, or identifying sources of additional facts where appropriate. Now, for that task memo, what will you actually be writing when you're going and completing an MPT? Really, there are a variety of types of assignments that task memo could ask you to draft, but they broadly fall into 3 categories: objective, persuasive, and what we call a wild card assignment. So what are the most common tasks? First most common is the objective memorandum, which is where you'll draft a document predicting the outcome of some type of legal issue that your client is asking you about. An example of an objective memo is a task analyzing whether the client has a viable claim under the state's Deceptive Trade Practices Act. Second most common is a persuasive argument or brief. A recent example of this task type is to persuade the court to exclude evidence of a criminal defendant's prior convictions. And then third most common task is a letter. So for example, you might be asked to write a demand letter, which demands that the recipient take or refrain from some type of action. So for that wildcard assignment, that is an uncommon document type that would be outside of those three task types, the objective, persuasive, or that letter. For example, examinees have drafted a closing argument, contract provisions, and findings of fact and conclusions of law. If you do get a wildcard MPT, don't panic. The packet usually provides you instructions on how to draft those more unusual document types, because they know it's a little bit more of an unusual request. So just follow the instructions they give you and then pay special attention to whether you should be using an objective or persuasive tone in your legal analysis. And then this chart here that I have pulled up shows you the frequency of each one of those MPT types from 2006 all the way up until the February 2023 bar exam. And this is not necessarily predictive of what task type will be selected for your bar exam, but it is really helpful information to know just in terms of your study prep, because you're seeing those things that do come up more often. So you would definitely want to be familiar and have practice an objective memo, persuasive brief, and a letter, since those are the most common. And unlike other components of the UBE, the MPT is not a test of substantive knowledge. There's no material that you need to memorize for the MPT. It is all about practice. Because of that, many examinees overlook the MPT in favor of studying the black letter law sections of the exam. So those multiple choice questions or those essays, but don't fall into this trap. You'll need to be highly efficient with your time to succeed on the MPT because they do give you a lot of information and you have about 90 minutes to synthesize all of it and then draft your assignment. So you've likely taken, though, a legal writing class in your first year of law school, which is great news because those skills are transferable to the MPT section. For an example, you probably wrote either an objective memo or a persuasive brief, or maybe both in your legal writing class your first year of law school. Now, in terms of scoring for the MPT, each jurisdiction grades the MPT and determines its own policy in regard to that weight that's given to the MPT. So for the UBE jurisdictions, though, which is the majority of you on this call today, 20% is what the portion of your score that is dedicated to that MPT. And then just to give you an idea of what score is needed to do well on this section, in Quimbee Bar Review, we grade our MPTs using a 6-point scale that's similar to essay scoring, and a 4 out of 6 would be passing for an MPT. Obviously, scores are all average, so that's just kind of a good number to shoot for, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of how well you kind of need to do on this component of the exam. So now let's talk briefly about strategy. So as I mentioned, timing really is crucial on the MPT because you have a lot to read through before you can begin writing. Generally, we recommend splitting your time in half. So half of the time to read and organize your answer, and then half of the time to write. That way you don't run out of time and you make sure you get through all the material. So since you get 90 minutes per PT, that translates to 45 minutes to read and organize, and then 45 minutes to write. And then a little bit more detail here, we suggest this strategy to stay on track. So let's go ahead and walk through this here. So step 1, about 3 minutes or so, read the task memo, start a working outline. So the task memo is the first document to appear in that file, and that's where you'll learn what you're drafting, and it's that memorandum from your supervising attorney, and we'll look at one in just a minute. It's really a treasure trove of critical information. So when reading the task memo, you're going to want to take notes on essentially 4 things: what kind of document you're writing, whether the tone of the document is persuasive or objective, who your audience is. So it could be a judge if you're writing, a brief in support of a motion, could be a supervising attorney, could be your client, opposing counsel, whoever that audience is, you need to know so that way you're writing to that audience. And then just take note of any other instructions in the memo that you would need to complete the task. After you read that task memo, start a really short working outline with any of that information that you know. Step 2, 2 minutes, just skim the file. You can't know what facts will affect the outcome under the law unless you first know the law. So at this point, just skim to get a sense of what information is available. Just read quickly without taking any notes. Then you're going to read the library carefully. So you're going to extract all of the law from the library. And as you read each authority, extract the relevant law, add it to that working outline. Below each issue, you might be assigned to address, just bullet point your applicable rules. Just kind of keep an eye on all of that law as you're going through it and take notes. Then you'll go back, you'll dive into the file. At this point, you've read the library, you've created a working outline of the rules. Now you read each document in the file and just continue to flesh out that outline. Below the rules, you can add in facts that you'll be using in the application section. You can nest each one of those facts below like the element or factor that it supports. And then when reading the file, you should also determine whether the court's holding in any of the cases would help or harm your client, and then just kind of identify any opportunities where you can analogize or make distinctions between those cases and your particular facts. Then you already have a working outline, but in this little step 5 minutes, you'll just want to confirm, make sure it's organized well, make sure it matches the instructions, double check you have a plan for all the cases and where you're going to talk about them, and just make sure you put all the facts that you wanted in there. Just kind of make everything, make sure you have kind of everything you need there. And then for that last 45 minutes, you are just writing. So you'll devote the other half of your time to just writing a response. And if you have that created, that solid outline, this will focus your thoughts and really keep you on track. And you can utilize a CREAC format kind of for that as well, depending on what you're discussing with the issues. Now, a little bit more about the formatting. So as you saw, a lot of different types of documents that you could be drafting for each one of these MPTs in the past. So I pulled up a couple different examples here of just what the formatting looks like so you can see that structure. So this one is an objective memorandum. So this is our example in our bar review course about what that objective memorandum should look like in terms of format. I'm just giving you a sample format so you can have that structure. So you can see probably looks similar to something you might have drafted in your 1L legal writing class. It's just simple formatting that is clearly organized, and you'll have the point headings that are describing your legal issues. You'll have the analysis, another point heading, analysis, and a conclusion. And you'll literally write discussion, conclusion, like you can have those words in there as well. Now you can see how that format differs with this persuasive brief format, because here you're trying to convince the court of your legal argument. You're trying to persuade them. So with this task, instead of just simple issue headings, like summary judgment or, just different things just based off the issue, kind of shortened words there. Instead, you're going to have a point heading that is providing that specific application of a rule of law to your facts. So you're going to be a little bit different with these headings that you're using, but you're still having that general structure of having your argument, a conclusion, and then just a very simple heading is fine at the top. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Now, final example I have up here of the formatting is this letter. So you can see here, it is like a normal letter format, but you're still going to be using some point headings in the body of the letter here, just to keep everything organized and so that the grader can really follow your reasoning and know exactly where you're discussing each relevant issue in the body of that letter. You also want a very brief introductory paragraph. Again, Don't want to spend too much time on the intro because you're really getting into that body of the letter and it is time pressured. Just a short one. And then you will want to have a closing paragraph depending on whatever the situation is that you're discussing. Okay, so now let's look at a sample MPT. So due to the length of the MPT packets, it's really difficult to cover an entire MPT on the call today. But I pulled out the table of contents, the task memo, and then the guidelines here. So we're gonna walk through each one of those things. So just so you can see an idea of what's included in each packet. There are also full sample MPTs from previous bar exams available at the link at the very top of this slide here. So that takes you to the bar examiner's website. The NCBE are the National Conference of Bar Examiners. They're the people that make the UBE. And that link will just take you to their website and you can look at some previous MPTs, including this February 2018 MPT that we're going to walk through today. So for this February MPT, you can see that the file included the task memo to the examinee. So that's that memorandum. Some guidelines for persuasive briefs from the fictional law firm that you as the examinee works for. It has a newspaper article, has some excerpts from a client interview, and it has the defendant's motion to exclude victim statements and deny restitution. Spoiler alert, we will be writing a brief kind of against that motion, so that's why that's included. Then the library includes excerpts from the Franklin Crime Victims' Rights Act and 3 cases from the Franklin Court of Appeal. As a side note, all MPTs utilize the fictional state of Franklin, so expect to see that on your MPT and don't let that throw you off. That's just the fake state they've created for these. And then another thing to note for this table of contents, note these page numbers. They're not giving you entire cases that you're going to have to read. They're excerpts. They'll also have various levels of authority. So these 3 are all from Franklin Court of Appeal, but sometimes it'll be Franklin Supreme Court or Franklin Trial Court. And they also have different years. So you want to keep an eye on that to make sure if, this case overturns something in this one, then you're not using this one as the relevant authority. So keep an eye on that when determining that relevant case law and what is applicable to your particular assignment or factual circumstances. Now let's take a look at that task memo. So I copy and pasted that task memo into here so you can see what it actually looks like. So this is from the bar examiners themselves. This is one of those free ones that's available on the website. So again, it's the first document to appear in the file. And again, you're going to take notes on those 4 things. You're going to be looking as you're going through this about what document you're writing, whether that tone is persuasive or objective, who your audience is, and if there are any other particular instructions. So let's go ahead and read through this together and you can kind of keep an eye out for those things we're looking for. It's this and then the next slide. So this is the memorandum to the examinee. And you work at this fictional law firm, again, in the city of Franklin. So we represent Sarah Karth. Sarah Karth's sister, Valerie, was physically injured and incapacitated last summer when an unsupervised teenager set off fireworks at a neighborhood 4th of July party. The teenager, a minor, was also injured. Valerie was struck by the fireworks and also suffered economic injury because sparks from the fireworks started a fire that burned her garage to the ground. The man who sold the fireworks to the teenager, Greg Clegane, was convicted of the felony of unlawful sale of fireworks to a minor. Clegane's sentencing hearing is in 2 weeks. Sarah Karth wishes to read victim impact statements at the sentencing hearing, both on her own behalf and on Valerie's behalf. She also has submitted a request that Clegane pay restitution for the losses she and her sister have sustained because of his actions. Last week, the prosecution notified Sarah that Clegane's counsel has filed a motion, 1, to exclude the proposed victim impact statements at the sentencing hearing, arguing that Sarah and Valerie are not victims within the meaning of the Franklin Crime Victims' Rights Act, and 2, deny the restitution requests. copy of Clegane's motion is attached. Again, we saw that was in the file, so you'll have a copy of that. I intend to file a brief in opposition to this motion on behalf of Sarah, asking that the court include Sarah's and Valerie's victim impact statements and order Clegane to pay restitution to both of them. Please draft the argument section of our brief. In drafting your argument, be sure to follow the attached guidelines. Make the most persuasive argument possible under the FCVRA and relevant case law. So now recall those 4 things that we were looking for and I bolded some of these sections for you guys. So first, we learned that this MPT is asking us to draft a persuasive brief in support of our motion here. We're drafting the argument section in opposition to that defendant's motion, so asking the court to include the victim impact statements and to order Clegane to pay restitution for them. Thus, our audience is the court. And then finally, this task memo gave us some really specific instructions. So it said to follow the attached guidelines, so we'll have to check those out in the next slide, and to make a persuasive argument under both case law and the FCVRA. So you have to make sure you include both of those. If you go through all the cases and forget to include an analysis of the FCVRA, that would definitely lose you points here because you're explicitly told to look at both. Now let's look at those attached guidelines that were included here. And honestly, there's a lot of good advice just on how to write MPTs in these guidelines that the bar examiners provided. So this is a fake memorandum, again, at this law firm that you theoretically work at. And I'm going to read this bottom portion of these formatting instructions. So it says, your legal argument should make your points clearly and succinctly, citing relevant authority for each legal proposition. Do not restate the facts as a whole at the beginning of your legal argument. Instead, integrate the facts into your legal argument in a way that makes the strongest case for your client. And I bolded this portion because that is an example of a way that an examinee, going through this quickly, again, it's time pressured, so we totally understand it's very easy to miss these little specific bits of information. So if you're reading this task memo or these formatting instructions for the first time, you'll want to write that down, put in your outline. No fact section at the beginning. You have to incorporate the facts as part of your argument. So if an examinee, if a grader is looking at your paper and they see you have a fact section at the beginning, that will immediately lose you points. So you got to be on the lookout for those types of things in these documents. Now, going to the rest of this, again, I bolded a few things that are generally good advice for MPT writing, and we're just going to read through this a little bit more quickly. So use headings that should not state abstract conclusions, but that integrate factual detail into legal propositions. So again, not just generic headings, you're going to use facts into your headings, making them more persuasive. And it gives an example of an ineffective heading here, which is the court should not admit evidence of the victim's character. An effective one would be more like the court should refuse to admit evidence of the defendant's character for violence because the defendant has not raised a claim of self-defense. So you're giving a reason as to why they should not admit that evidence. In the body of your argument, analyze applicable legal authority and persuasively argue how both the facts and the law support our client's position. Supporting authority should be emphasized, but note this, contrary authority should also be cited, addressed, and explained or distinguished. So again, would bold that, put a little star beside it, note to yourself that you want to still include that contrary authority. Don't just ignore it when you're writing your argument. And then finally, it tells us to anticipate and accommodate any weaknesses in our case in the body of our argument. If possible, structure it in a way where we can highlight our strengths and minimize our argument's weaknesses. And it also says make conclusions if necessary, but only on points that do not involve essential elements of your claim or defense. So that's just another thing to keep in mind as you're going through. Now, again, there are a lot of sample MPTs from previous bar exams available on the bar examiner's website, which again, would highly recommend checking out so that way you can see the full packet. They have those PDFs that are all downloadable on their website. So I included the link again here at the very bottom, so you can check those out. So that kind of concludes our walkthrough of that February 2018 MPT. The rest of it would just be that case law and then those factual documents that you saw in that table of contents a couple slides ago. So for these last few slides, we're going to be switching gears to talking through how to prepare and some of those common mistakes we see from students as they're preparing for the MPT. By far, the most common mistake is avoiding practice. Don't wait until the last minute. You want to start practicing the performance test early in bar preparation. You don't have to master any substantive law to start taking practice MPTs. Because again, it doesn't test your knowledge of any law. That's often why students avoid it because they think it's a little bit easier section. But you really do want to make sure you are practicing that and getting the timing down. Again, the packet's going to give you the authorities and what you need to complete the assignment so you can start practicing your very first week of bar review. Another common mistake is skipping directions in that task memo. That's why I highlighted that so much as we were walking through and looking at the task memo of those specific instructions that are given to you, because you really do want to pay attention to those instructions, because the instructions will often give you vital information about the proper format of your answer. Graders will be looking at how well your answer adheres to the instructions. So again, for that February MPT we just looked at, a mistake that would be very obvious to the grader would be including a separate facts section in your persuasive brief. And these are the easy points that you should never lose because you want to star those instructions when you read them. Another one would be avoiding relevant authorities. Make a point of using every relevant case and statute provided in the exam booklet. Demonstrating your mastery of the authorities is important for scoring points. And again, as an example, with that February one we just looked at, you had to include both the Franklin Crime Victims' Rights Act and the cases provided. You couldn't just use the cases. And then finally, another mistake that we see in MPT practice is skimping on analysis. Graders look carefully at the analysis in your response. After all, they are assessing whether you are competent to practice law, and this is a practice lawyering assignment. So prioritize applying law to fact and skimp on other portions of your response, like introductory paragraphs or reciting factual background. You don't want to put a lot of effort into your facts section in terms of, getting like perfect maybe cites to the documents. Definitely don't need to do anything like that, because where you should really be spending the bulk of your time is that analysis portion. That's kind of the main goal here. Now, how to prepare? Practice is really the key to success with the performance tests. It familiarizes you with the structure, what the file looks like, what the library looks like, what types of documents you would have to draft. And then it helps you develop that quick pace that is required to earn a high score. So to that end, doing timed PTs is essential once you've gotten the hang of writing them. You can have some at the beginning where you're not timing, just getting your feet wet, if you will. But that 90-minute time frame can be a bit tricky. So with practice and an organized approach, it's definitely something you can get there. And also, you can take some advanced legal writing classes at your law school to help you prepare right now. If you're still in school, you still have time to sign up for those classes. That can really help strengthen your legal analysis and writing skills, which at the core of the MPT is what they're trying to test. And really, the best plan is to practice with real performance tests from past bar exams, because you want to see actual ones that have gone through your school. Your bar course should offer practice PTs. As an example, with Quimbee, these are just some of the things that we put in our course to have you get that practice for the performance test. So for example, we have MPTs starting literally on day 1 of our course. We just talked about that, common mistake of students waiting until the last minute to practice MPTs. So we really try to avoid that by putting it in the very, very first day. We have all of the MPTs from past bar exams. We include every single one. So if you want to see, every task they've ever asked students to do, you have access to that full bank. And then we also have these MPT self-assessment checklists. I'm happy to chat more about this if anyone's curious off the webinar, but essentially it just makes self-assessment really easy because they list out each rule, analysis, or maybe organizational component, like not including a facts section. That would score you points, and you can just check off the things you've included in your response and then see how you would have scored. And then, of course, we have 3 MPT workshops, one for each type, and a graded MPT. And again, biggest way you will prepare for the MPT is by going through a commercial bar prep course. So just a little bit more about our course generally, if you're curious at all, and we'll go through this pretty quickly, don't worry. But we use a practice-based approach to, again, get you that practice that you need to simulate an actual bar exam experience. So we support all UBE jurisdictions, plus we do California and Florida. So for those California students on the call, we have all the past California PTs, and we have plenty of prep in our course for that portion of your exam as well. And then there's just a little bit about our features of our bar review program. So some of these features include using proven learning science to develop our materials. So learning theory really is at the core of our mission here. So we design all of our materials to incorporate findings from over 100 years of educational psychology research. And one way that we incorporate that learning science is through our illustrated lesson videos in our signature Quimbee style. So these are all 5 to 7 minute bar specific videos that provide strategy tips and example driven lessons to help you pass on the first try. And then again, we do take a practice-based approach to bar prep with plenty of practice questions from past bar exams incorporated through full-length diagnostics and a simulated MBE to allow you to practice exam performance. And then, of course, through practice essays and a practice performance test that you'll get feedback on from our attorney graders to improve that writing performance over time and work towards those writing skills that you need for the exam. If you do want to check out Quimbee Bar Review, you can schedule a consultation of the course just by scanning this QR code up on the screen. And then you can pick a time for either myself or one of my colleagues to log on to a course and walk you through the program so you can see it for yourself and ask any questions that you have. To enroll, if you're interested in purchasing our Bar Review course, you can just sign up right on our main website. We handle all enrollments online through a normal checkout process. And then, of course, if you have any questions but don't want to book a Zoom call with me or anything, or with one of our bar review directors, you can always just shoot us an email at sales@quimbee.com. So we've been super proud to help so many students through the bar exam. And this is just a small snapshot of some of the feedback that students have given us who've used our course to pass the exam. We have a lot more information in detail about these stories on our website if you want to check them out. So you can just go to bar review and then success stories and you can check that out, or you can scan this other QR code at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I will turn it back to Emily for the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. As you said, we're going to answer your questions here now. If you have them, you can put them in the Q&A feature. We might respond to you directly or we'll respond live. Again, if we're not able to get to your question, we'll put our contact information back up again here before the webinar ends, or you can always click around quimbee.com as Lori was just showing you. We did receive quite a few questions from you all when you registered, so I'm going to start with a few of those. The first one was more of a general bar exam question. But Lori, how would you recommend students best fit in the time to study for the bar exam during their last semester of law school? This is someone who is going to be taking the bar exam in July of 2025.
That's a good question. So I would say generally, you don't necessarily have to. Most bar review companies' full-time courses are about 10 weeks. So that's like mid-May to July if you're taking the July exam. We also do offer a part-time schedule. So that one would be more of the final semester. So that's end of January to July. But if you're thinking just lightly preparing while still in school, you could definitely take some bar exam classes for your final semester for the subjects that are tested on the exam. So some examples are like corporations, family law, will, trust and estates, criminal procedure even. That way your coursework is also doing a dual purpose of helping you prepare for the bar exam. Or if you're thinking even lighter prep than that, you could always look back over your 1L outlines, lightly reviewing those, kind of familiarize yourself with those subjects because those subjects are tested on the bar exam. So that could be helpful too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. Next question is for all of the Californians on the call. So someone is asking, how does this test align with California's new relationship with Kaplan?
Yes, good question. Yes, so the California bar exam has been a little bit in flux because of that new relationship, but the good news is in terms of students preparing, really no difference. So California administers their own performance test. It's very similar in format to the MPT, and your bar review course will only be using California PTs when you're preparing. And there shouldn't be any changes to that part of California's exam moving forward. Like the bar examiners have said, the questions developed with this new partnership with Kaplan will not substantially like modify training or prep required for the exam. So it should be the same format. So there's not really any change to your study prep that you'd have to worry about. They should look the same as previous performance tests that California has offered because California has always kind of written their own performance tests, at least for the last several years.
Great, thank you. Next question we have is, what is an efficient way to read everything in the library and still have enough time to formulate and execute the writing assignment?
It is tricky with the timing component. So I think really sticking to a plan like that writing strategy that I covered in the slides earlier with all the like time components and the different tasks, especially keeping that like half time reading and organizing, half time drafting. Um, so that can really kind of keep you on track. And then I will say reading things in like that particular order we outlined is also helpful because then when you're reading the library, you've lightly skimmed the factual information, and when you're diving in deep to the factual information, you already know the law, so you know what you're looking for to bolster your argument. um so kind of keeping an eye on all of those pieces and kind of sticking to that plan. If you have an organized plan that you're keeping track of, it definitely helps kind of keep you on track and just make sure you're not running out of time. And then, of course, make sure you're keeping an eye on that clock and not getting too bogged down with like a certain case or part of the file that you're given.
Awesome. Next question we have, someone is asking, does formatting matter more than we think it does?
Probably, but more in your ability to follow instructions, I would say. So I mentioned earlier, not writing a separate fact section if you were told not to, or not writing headings in the way that they specifically told you not to write them. But in terms of formatting, like don't waste time writing like a really pretty signature or like a firm heading or any type of like true just like formatting like that, but more focus on making your format easy to follow, organized. It shouldn't be difficult for the grader to know where you talked about issue one or what your ultimate conclusion is. Like that should all be organized well.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So let me see here. Okay, here's one that could apply to everybody. Tips and tricks for how to begin the MPT. I feel like I get overwhelmed and then I freeze and don't know what to do.
That's very fair because, like I said, I know it's a lot of material to look at and kind of know where to start. So that's why really having a strategy and a working outline is so important. And it can also be helpful to be familiar with those common task types and what formatting to use for each. So if you practice a lot of objective memos, try to use the same type of formatting if you can for each one. That way it'll kind of come to you and you'll know how to format it on the exam. And then again, that working outline can really be helpful because once you see persuasive brief, okay, got it. You know the formatting to write out, just write out that formatting, kind of do the easy thing, and then just plug in that information as you go. So that loose outline is a really easy first step that can take a lot of the stress out of starting writing. Um, and then just make sure too, like when you're reading that library, mark up those cases as you go. You'll have a packet, like a physical one. You can write all over it. You can make notes as to what cases relate to what facts, or just any other notes that will help you when you go back and look at those cases to start putting them in when you're actually doing the writing portion and actually writing it out.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This one comes from a non-native English speaker, but maybe to the tips would work for anybody. But they said, how can a non-native English speaker improve their writing skills for MPT and ME?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So with that one, I would say really practice, but looking at those sample answers too, especially with the MEE and with the MPT, because you often will have sample answers for that portion as well. So ideally, you want like realistic answers in addition to the model answers, or just kind of a list of at a minimum what needs to be included. So an example of this concretely is in our bar review course, we have realistic answers for a lot of our essays. So you'll have the model answer, which is like the perfect bar examiner provided answer that has a beautiful discussion of all of the issues that are included. And then we'll have a realistic answer that a student wrote, that passed, that included enough to do well and to get a high passing score. So if you're seeing that kind of realistic picture of what needs to be included, that can really help you model your own answer off of that. And then just the more you go through and do that and look at those models and then write them out yourself, especially if you're getting some graded feedback, that will really help develop your writing skills over time. So starting that process early, looking at those samples, and again, looking at samples for MPTs too. We have those checklists that I mentioned that kind of shows you at a minimum what you need to include to pass for any given MPT that we have in the program.
Great, thanks, Lori. All right, we're going to wrap the webinar up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any further questions we did not get to, our contact information is going to be up on the screen here. Our team is ready to answer any more of your questions on the bar exam itself through our email barprep@quimbee.com. You can also click around quimbee.com to learn more, including booking that personalized consultation one-on-one with a bar director that Lori was talking about earlier, and they can answer your questions directly and also let you know about any promotional pricing available to you. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on the resources section of quimbee.com and emailing it out to you by the end of this week. So please be sure to look out for that to watch it back or share it with a friend. All right, well, we hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you again, Lori.
Thanks, everyone.